Well, welcome to the session here. I know folks are trickling in, but it is 11 o'clock, and so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for coming to this session. This is Waste to Watts. We're going to talk electricity. I wanted to do a bit of a show of hands. How many of you all have been in the industry for less than 5 years? Okay, that's quite a few. And how many of you have been in the industry for more than 10 years? All right, there's a few there too. Folks who have been around for more than 10 years remember that biogas to electricity, that's all we ever talked about. We, we had lots of technologies that were building biogas to electricity CHPs, and lots of farmers were building the digesters on their dairy farms with CHPs. And it was at that time, the only thing, the only option. About 5 years ago, however, the wave of RNG was talked about. So the folks who have been here less than 5 years probably heard mostly about RNG. And here we are talking about electricity because there have been a few folks like us on the panel here who have been plugging along on the electricity end, even though it's not as hot as RNG, but we find value in it. And I think we are here to talk to you about how we are finding value in it from our perspectives, even without eRINs. Now, how many of people here know what eRINs are? Okay, a few. So eRINs, if eRINs come, everybody will be talking about electricity. We know that. But here we are talking about electricity without eRINs, and that's what we want to focus on. So I'm going to hand off and do a few quick introductions. I'm Rashi Yaki. I'm CEO of Agrid Energy. Agrid Energy was started about 8 years ago by me, and we've been focusing on dairy digesters to electricity. Adam?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. My name is Adam Wright. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Vespine Energy. Vespine Energy is an energy developer focused specifically on distributed electricity generation fueled by biogas. We have a technology and market-enabled approach that allows us to profitably develop sites that are too small or harder to develop for RNG.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Paul Gibson with Bloom Energy, and I lead our business development activities in biogas and the renewable fuels industry more broadly. For those who don't know Bloom, we're a solid oxide-based fuel cell technology, publicly traded. We have about a little over 1.2 gigawatts deployed across the globe, producing clean, non-combustion, reliable, highly efficient electricity 24/7, 365, and we're running on natural gas, biogas, and hydrogen fuels.
I'm Scott Martin. I'm a senior project manager at Burns & Mac. I've been doing biogas projects my entire career, and I love landfills. So looking forward to talking to you guys today.
Well, thank you. So we are going to talk just a little bit about, take a little deeper dive in who we are. Quick introductions, but just a little bit deeper dive of why do we value electricity and what do we get out of it and where do we want the industry to go. So we're going to start with a tad bit of market overview. Scott's going to talk about that a little bit, and then we're going to go into a little bit of deeper dive. So with that, Scott.
Sure. Yeah. So just kind of representing some of the concepts that are or themes that are ongoing in the market today. Wholesale power varies widely across the country in terms of pricing. So you see lower prices traditionally in the Southeast, and when you go to New England or Pacific Northwest, you tend to see higher pricing. In those markets, biogas to electricity projects can be more viable, but they're still somewhat challenged because electricity prices really have been relatively flat for the last 20 years. I would say there's some ongoing market themes that we'll speak to today, but one of the big ones is a lot of coal is coming offline, so utilities are looking at how they how they react to that. There's some regulatory drivers, obviously, that are occurring that are forcing that. So the slide on the far left kind of illustrates basically a significant increase in natural gas-based generation. And that's not only base load projected by major utilities, but also, as you can see, there's a news clip here about peaking plants, which can be regulated utilities. A lot of independent power producers also focus in on that market. So that market's poised to continue to grow to help facilitate the demand that's been created by fluctuations in renewable electricity. So I'd say those are kind of some of the major concepts. The other things that we hear a lot about at Burns and Mac are battery storage projects. Those projects take a lot of time to get into the grid. Similar to peaking plants, there's a long queue that takes a long time to get FERC approval. And so while there is a very substantially growing market in the battery storage space, it's got a long ways to go. Next slide. From a regulatory perspective, there's been some new regulations that were just passed 2 weeks ago, or finalized, I should say, and signed into law. So the new source performance standards for electric generating units and accompanying emission guidelines, for those of you that know the solid waste industry, landfills have similar new source performance standards and emission guidelines. The distinguishing characteristics are new source performance standards are when you have a new site or a site that makes a significant modification. That's a federally driven set of regulations. The emission guidelines similarly have to follow those federal rules, but it's up to the state to interpret how those rules are conveyed. And so this rule is really fresh. So I'm going to offer some thoughts here, but I am by no means a regulatory expert. So the rule is essentially focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and there's a couple of things that are contemplated within the rule. So for coal-fired electric utilities, carbon sequestration is essentially mandated at this point, and it's a phased approach. But for natural gas generating assets and other assets, there's different things that are available. The rule is considered technology neutral, and I think we've heard that plenty of times with respect to some of the Inflation Reduction Act approaches. But I think one of the things is, as I read through the preamble, that caught my eye is that cleaning and conditioning and methods for which you can achieve pollutant reductions can actually occur off-site. So when we think about RNG being produced off-site and maybe used to supplement a power plant, that could be a potential option here. The other thing that is in there as a what's called the Best System of Emission Reduction Act is carte blanche. Hydrogen, regardless of the production pathway, is approved by the rule. So I think there's a couple of things, and again, I'm no regulatory expert, but I think there's a couple of things in here that might allow states, especially under the emission guidelines, to allow for biogas-based loads to be used for electric generating units.
Great. Moving on next to Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I'll build on that introduction. I think at least one of the perspectives Bloom can bring to this conversation is talking a little bit more about the macro dynamics across the electricity industry in general, and sort of highlight where we believe that creates a somewhat unique opportunity for biogas to electricity projects. And that is that demand for, if we might have advancing the slide, please, but demand for clean, firm, hourly matched power is increasing, and it's increasing at a tremendous rate. And it's not just coming from your usual suspects, your sustainability leaders, your tech companies, et cetera. And you can see that recently there was a high-profile RFI with Microsoft, Nucor, and Google, I believe. So even less, I guess, traditionally hard to abate industries, showing that there is demand for clean, around-the-clock, reliable, renewable power. The other aspect is that utilities can't really keep up with this new demand. There's a number of articles that have come out over the last few months and seemingly sort of every other day now. The Washington Post is on the slide here. The New York Times had a lot of coverage around this issue. Elon Musk is telling us we're going to run out of power and transformers, etc. And we're also seeing utilities admit that this is the case. Some of the Virginia utilities can't keep up with the data center demand in their region. Some of the California-based utilities have told developers that there's going to be no new power interconnections in the next few years. So we're seeing these macro sort of fundamentals now play out more practically. One specific example in the biogas world is in wastewater treatment plants. They're looking at utilizing their biogas for resiliency purposes, essentially compliance purposes. Avoiding grid outages, avoiding discharging waste, avoiding black start. So that's a less traditional source of value than biogas into the transportation market, but it's one that's increasingly valued. And I believe there's a project that Ameresco are involved with Saxo that was publicly announced, and we've run into many more of these day to day as well. But broadly, well, sort of alongside that, broadly the grid's in trouble. And if you look at the load growth that's expected, it's not going to look anything, the future is not going to look anything like the past. The past was 1% demand growth year on year, predictable, sort of easy to plan around and easy to meet. The electrification of everything, data center build outs, AI, all the chips NVIDIA's selling need to be powered by something. So the load growth in the future is going to be at a much more accelerated rate, which is stressing an already stressed grid. On the supply side, you've got 3 to 5 year interconnection queues, so new supply is slow to come online, not to mention it's intermittent and displacing firm sort of dispatchable resources, which presents a further challenge. And then on the transmission side, it's hard to get new supply to demand. I think we need 100,000 new transmission miles to be built over the next 5 or 10 years. We did less than 1,000 in 2022, I think is the data point on the slide there. And then you've got the wild card that is weather that's increasingly unpredictable. So you've got, I guess the energy transition is going to require a mind-boggling amount of new electricity generation. And that's happening at the same time when you've got tremendous demand and new demand growth for clean, reliable, around-the-clock power. So there's a huge appetite for renewable power. And how many of the resources can meet that demand in a firm, around-the-clock manner? And arguably, there's no other sort of sources of power generation that can do that. But biogas to electricity is uniquely positioned to capitalize on that. And yes, the economics can be a challenge, but I guess based on these sort of macro longer term views, I think we all see opportunity there and agree that the premium that the market is willing to pay for renewable energy that can meet the demands of the moment is likely to increase. And then when you look at the RNG side of the equation, that CARB's making moves to make that be less or a lower mix of the transportation fuel to some level of saturation. Federally, I think 80% plus of the CNG dispensed is RNG already. I think dispensing capacity is somewhat stalled. We're not building new capacity. So if you look at the long run view of that premium for RNG, if we do reach true saturation, the value of that marginal RNG molecule becomes very interesting very quickly. So long run, I think that's sort of some of the fundamental reasons why we see value in electricity markets. I think the last slide I have here is maybe just to highlight one of the projects that Bloom's been involved with at the Bar 20 farm in California. I think Steve Shahadi was on one of the panels yesterday. You may have met him. This was developed with California Bioenergy, which I think represents a underappreciated model, specifically in California. Yes, we'd all love to have an eRIN, obviously, so stating the obvious, but projects like this at a negative 7.9 TCI score, which I think is the lowest score recorded in the program, that gets you equal or better LCFS value than an equivalent RNG project. And you've got very high grid costs in California, so using the electricity that this system produces on site avoids those high costs, which essentially replace the RIN value that's there for RNG. And then you've obviously got, eRIN sort of real option upside. And then you can use high efficiency technologies like Bloom's obviously thread that qualifies for ITC, which manages the CapEx side of these projects. And you've also got some self-generation incentive programs in California that help fund the CapEx as well. And projects like this pencil really well. And I think it's a underappreciated model in the sort of more recent trend that is biogas to RNG. So I'll maybe pause there and turn it over to the rest of the panel. Thank you.
No, thank you. That is a really great summary. So moving on to Adam from Vespine.
Yeah, thanks, Paul, and thanks everybody for those introductions. So at Vespine Energy, we have really two main approaches to electricity projects. The first one is what we would consider technology enabled. So we're taking advantage of recent developments in the modularization and distribution of data centers by actually physically co-locating the data center assets directly onto the site of biogas production. So this can either serve as a bridge to other use cases. Maybe you're having trouble getting an interconnect, or it can actually be a permanent installation. So, as Paul was just mentioning, the grid is in trouble in a lot of locations. It's very difficult to get an interconnect, but at the same time, demand from data centers for things like AI and high performance computing is shooting through the roof. And there's been a number of recent developments in that space that allows us to actually co-locate data centers, smaller modular data centers, kind of in the range of, let's say, 1 to 4 megawatts directly on the site. So it's essentially, we're bringing the data to the site and transporting data away as opposed to transporting electrons to the data center, if that makes sense. So it kind of flips that model on its head. So that's what we call our technology-enabled approach. The slide here is one of our sites that we have operational, which is a 2 megawatt data center co-located at a landfill in Wisconsin. And you can see the relative size. A 2 megawatt data center essentially fits inside of a 40-foot shipping container. So this is a way that we can help to kind of get around the various challenges with grid connections by co-locating assets directly on the site. So that's our technology-enabled approach. Our next approach is what we call our market-enabled approach, and this is where we are taking advantage of some of the things that Paul was mentioning. There has been a really important recent shift in energy markets that places a very high level of importance and therefore kind of a higher value on this concept of 24/7 renewable baseload. There's not a lot of technologies out there that can be rapidly deployed and solve that baseload power need. Geothermal maybe being one of them. There's been a lot of money and time placed in geothermal. But biogas is uniquely able to serve that in the sense that it is rapidly deployable and it is very localized. And so virtually every community, every county out there across the U.S. is going to have a source of biogas that is undeveloped, and that's kind of the market that we're playing in. And so for this business model, basically what we do is develop multiple regional projects. And when I say regional projects, I mean the same sort of grid region. So we're developing multiple regional projects, and instead of looking at them as individual projects, we look at them as essentially nodes as part of a larger distributed energy project, kind of like almost like a virtual power plant. And so by aggregating those sites together and then basically off-taking the entire electricity output through a single off-taker, we're able to get up to, even though we're developing 1 to 3 megawatt site nodes, we're able to get up to 20, 30 megawatts in terms of a single offtake. And that's kind of the level of electricity that some of these corporate off-takers are looking to procure. Our flagship project, which we call Project Pleiades, after kind of the Pleiades star cluster, also has additional support through the Department of Energy Loan Programs Office. So we're also kind of taking advantage of, in the absence of eRINs, there are also a number of, policy-enabled approaches that we can take, and this DOE program is one of them.
Thank you, Adam. I'm going to go back a couple of charts and give Scott a chance on the projects that he's focusing on currently.
Thank you. So Burns & Mac currently has what I would say 2 biogas to electricity projects that are in design phase right now. The first one is in Washington State. So Washington State has a pretty aggressive RPS, a renewable portfolio standard. Our client is a municipal utility in this case. So in looking at this, the client wants to develop this project, maybe not purely for economic reasons, but also resiliency reasons. So within the area where the power will be generated, essentially there will be a loop that will serve as a local microgrid for backup power should grid power not be available at times. It's a rather large facility, so we're going through all the complexities with permitting right now. So BACT and PSD and all that fun stuff. But I think we come to resolution with ecology on a number of issues, and we're in detailed design here and looking forward to building this thing next year. The other project that we've got going is combined heat and power project. So Burns & Mac was originally the EPC contractor for a landfill gas to CHP project for a healthcare facility in Wisconsin. We started talking last year. They're in the process of developing a campus-wide microgrid with the local utility. And as part of that, our scope is looking at adding redundancy within the existing generation system. So we're adding a second generator to basically use landfill gas around the clock and feed the batteries for campus power. So those are two, I'd say, real world tangible examples of good projects that we've got going. Thank you.
Thank you. So you heard few examples of how everybody is looking at power in a different way. I'm going to move to a little bit of what Agrid Energy does, and you all may have heard this before, so sorry if it's a bit of a repeat. But Agrid Energy's mission is very simple. We are focusing on small to medium-sized dairy farms. What we are trying to do is buck the trend of dairy farms disappearing, the smaller ones disappearing, and consolidation in the industry. So we wanted to kind of focus on trying to get those farms to be more financially sustainable while they are reducing their emissions, and take that methane, add methane emissions or reduce methane emissions from the food waste from within 50-mile radius, and see if we can solve more than one problem at the same time. And that's one thing about digester projects is we're always solving more problems than one. It's not a single thing, you know. So we were focusing on that. We've been doing that for 8 years now. That's why some of you may have heard the journey that we have gone through. And at this moment, we have 5 digesters that are operational. They're all about 0.5 megawatt. They're not super large. But in that process, we are actually processing 120,000 tons of food waste in those 5 facilities. So when you look at it that way, and how much of that food waste is being diverted from landfill, it makes anaerobic digesters a very effective technology to solve that problem. And we're producing about 3 megawatt of electricity across all of those 5 projects. I always say, well, you know, our 3 megawatt is equal to 3 times 5 or 3 times 6 of solar, you know, so don't think of us as small. We really produce 24/7 energy. And the other big thing that we really do is we do not create instability in the grid. We inject electricity consistently into the grid, and we are the base load. And so if we start kind of talking a little bit more about how we are the only renewable power that actually could take away base load, then we are actually way more effective than solar and wind. But when you go to renewable energy conferences, all you hear about is solar and wind. How do we up our position in this dialogue? That's the work we need to do as an industry. So one of the focus projects that I wanted to highlight, you all saw how all of us are doing different things, and showcasing a picture. Hopefully picture speaks 1,000 words, but this is our picture. Very proud of this latest project that just went live in January of this year. This is in New York. Not a very friendly state when it comes to treating biogas to electricity projects. They don't even consider us clean. But hey, if we show them, look how we are solving their food waste problem, we are hoping that that would make a difference, and that they will change their change their legislation and regulations to support more of these projects, because this state does have a lot of dairies. We are selling our electricity to Chobani. So we are saying, hey, Chobani, we take you take the milk from this dairy farm or dairy farms around here. You send us your food waste, and we provide you electricity. We create this circularity. And now we're talking about scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions in this supply chain. And that's what we want to talk about. Let's just talk rural, single, small, local level projects that are helping that community to grow, be more robust in the long run, and reduce its emissions. We are having problems in this project. So next thing we're going to all talk about is we do have challenges as we go forward. We are only able to export 300 kW in this project currently. We are producing 1.5, maybe even 1.8. Why? Grid. Grid is not able to take our power. So, hey, is there collaboration with non-grid solutions like Vespine Energy? Sure, there could be opportunities there. But what do we do about the grid? The grid is not going to move fast, as Paul said. So there are challenges in this industry. That's not just our challenges, it's the challenges. We know electricity is going to become more and more and more important, and we need to talk through different business models. So what are our market drivers? Aggregate Energy's market drivers are really, we cannot do pencil electricity projects without food waste. Food waste tipping fees is a huge part of our business model. And so 8 years ago, when I started this company, we had 5 states that were doing food waste diversion, California and 4 states on the East Coast. Today, there are way many more states that are doing food waste diversion. So if you could, it's the orange color people that are definitely doing it. So orange and blue. So there are quite a few states that are starting to do this now. And we think that certain cities are starting to do this. So there are star marks around cities that are starting to do it. And we think that movement is going to grow. And the reason that movement is going to grow is because EPA, USDA, and FDA just did a study that said landfills are emitting 35% of methane. And the reason landfills are emitting 35% of methane is because it has food waste. By the time you create the layer on the landfill and you cover it up, and then you put the next layer and then you cover it up, food waste has already digested. It hasn't even reached those pipes that suck the methane out of the landfill. So if we diverted food waste from landfills, we can reduce emissions of the landfills. So this movement may not even come from food diversion regulation. It may actually simply come from legislation on landfills. Hey, you need to reduce your emissions. Once that legislation comes, that's a federal legislation. Even if there is no food waste diversion laws, the only way landfills can reduce their emissions is by diverting food waste. So we think that that ball is moving. And then the second industry driver that we focus on, and this is more sort of like a heartstring kind of thing, today, we have less than 30,000 dairies. You look at that trend chart on how the dairies have been shrinking. Literally in the past 5 years, 5 years ago when there was a census, there were 40,000 dairies. Just in the past 5 years, we are down to 30, and that trend isn't going to go away. It is going to continue to shrink. The smaller dairies are going to continue. But what do we need to do? This is affecting rural America. This is affecting, when those dairies shut down, which are all owned by families, the next generation goes to cities. You take this infrastructure away that we have for a robust rural America, what we are going to create is a problem on the other end, which is not what we want to do. So for us, it's not just about energy, it's about ensuring that we all have a healthy country to live in. And that's why we focus on USDA's REAP programs, because that's their mission too. And they're helping us do that. So large is not always good. In fact, it's been shown that Northeast dairies are more efficient now versus the Southwest dairies. Because they are smaller, they're able to do more efficient management of the dairy farms. And just this whole idea of factory farming, how do we go away from that? There's just so much EJ or environmental justice issues that are showing up in our industry. We need to focus, we need to make sure that that doesn't happen. We don't want to minimize it. We want to work with them because it is the human issue that we are focusing on. So those are the two trends that we focus on as we look. These projects are not easy, but we think we are doing the right thing. And so we continue to focus on that. So I'm going to take a quick pause here, see if any of my panel members here want to add anything else at this moment.
Yeah, I mean, I can add a little bit to the importance of food waste diversion and emissions reduction. There has been a lot of attention in the press lately about landfills and how there's more emissions coming from landfills than we had thought there were. Because now there's satellites that are actually detecting it, whereas previously it was more based on sort of algorithmic and mathematical models. And so I think that just underscores the importance of electricity as a solution, because we are very heavily invested in the landfill industry, and even if a landfill were to say today, I'm going to divert all my future food waste away from the landfill, that landfill is still going to have decades of gas that's left inside. That it just sort of underscores the need to have viable solutions that are, more likely than not going to be electricity related rather than RNG related. An RNG development with a declining gas curve is going to be a very difficult development. So it just underscores the importance of electricity in the future of biogas.
Yeah, I maybe add my reaction as I listening to you guys and your projects, and I think in the environment we're in with different incentive environments between electricity and RNG, right? I think the fact that all these projects work and are profitable and having a tremendous impact sort of underscores the value of electricity. And I think there's plenty of data out there that proves that biogas to electricity generation is a better environmental outcome. There are many non-combustion, high efficiency technologies out there. And then whether you put that into an EV or use it in a local circular economy, that's a better for environmental outcome. And that's very highly valued in pockets today. And I think we've touched on some of those pockets. And I think I in particular touched on some of the fundamentals that support a number of reasons why that renewable premium from biogas should be increasing into the future. So I'm not really going to talk about eRINs, but I think it's important maybe I think one of the areas we could do a better job as an industry is at the more state, local level, and look at things more things like the biomat tariff in California, more sort of feeding tariffs at that state, local level rather than the federal level, that will hopefully recognize the environmental impacts and the increasing value to society of these projects. And I think Patrick remarked on a similar topic in his keynote, and highlighting the benefits that these electricity projects could do, and looking at more sort of policy support on a more localized level to stimulate electricity and unlock some of the smaller undeveloped assets that are out there. So those are some of my thoughts and reactions as I listen through the sessions there.
I think it's been pretty well covered, but maybe I'll just add, the use of biogas as a renewable resource it's effectively a battery. It's a base load. When you're contemplating projects, looking at it from a N+1 configuration, the local utility will incentivize that development. So the reason why we're looking at the Wisconsin project is specifically because their distributed renewable power rates for projects are are largely based upon wind development, which is relatively cheaper than biogas to electricity projects in terms of the cost to operate. So when you add that resiliency component in there, utilities are starting to incentivize that, and so that's another carrot that can be dangled when we're talking about these projects.
So we want to open up for questions now. We wanted to talk a little bit, give you guys a view of where we are in our thought process. We can continue to ask questions and talk through that, but we wanted to open this up in the middle right now, see if there is, what are you guys thinking? And what do you want us to just, maybe opine upon a little bit and maybe even continue to think about it in the future? Please don't be shy.
Hi, my name is Lucy Buck, and I'm with 3 Degrees Group. So I've been listening to a lot of discussion about this, and I don't argue with the projections on the increased demand for electricity. It does seem pretty clear. Talking about incentivization solutions that utilities could provide, though, having different rate structures so that, that the base load component will be more valued, bringing more ROI to these kinds of projects, supporting them, and also then trying to, incent users to save. So, it's really expensive. I'll run my dishwasher at X time. And, it's kind of that Amory Lovins approach, let's try and save. But I think it takes, I think there's a lot of fear that comes with, oh my gosh, this huge tsunami of demand. And yeah, it is increasing. But I think that there's also some structuring and some policy work that could be done that could have a huge impact. I don't really know. I can't quantify that, but I think it's there. So I don't know if there are any comments that you guys have on that.
Yeah, I think specifically in regions where capacity is incentivized. So there's certain regions in the country where capacity has no value. So like, for example, in ERCOT or Texas, it's all a real-time power market. So there's not necessarily an incentive for capacity, but across multiple regions in the country, there are incentives. So that's where if we message that landfill gas projects or any type of biogas project conceived with a little bit of redundancy adds resiliency to the grid, I think that helps with getting revenue associated with having capacity and then also revenue associated with the electricity generation.
Yeah, I just commented, I certainly don't have an answer to that, but I agree. And I think we're at a point where there's some alignment around this tremendous demand growth, and it's going to be there, but it's kind of long dated. It's a little bit of a mirage maybe, but I think we're actually starting to see that play out practically, and people are feeling the pain of that. And I think that's the impetus for reform and new policy to support these things. So I feel like we're maybe starting and early in that journey, and more and more people are feeling the pain of this big macro trend. And hopefully that's the thing that's going to cause people to act and stimulate some changes around that. But yeah, I agree with your thoughts.
And I can comment a little bit as well. I think that from our view, I think that the market trends are going to be driven more by corporates as opposed to utilities. I think corporations are, able to, they have a large, checkbook, firstly, but also they have sort of internal stakeholder and ESG narratives that they need to kind of uphold. And you combine that with other kind of policy level changes. One notable example would be the recent changes or the recent clarifications on the hydrogen tax credit, I believe 45V, where, if you're a hydrogen developer and you want to claim, the full $3 per kilogram tax credit, you need to source 24/7 hourly matched electricity to power your electrolyzer. And so, from that perspective, we do see the trend really led by corporates as opposed to utilities. Just because there's so many utilities out there, and it's difficult. Nobody's incentivized by the same structures.
Yeah, I think my colleagues covered quite a bit, and the only thing I want to say, I was at a conference in Connecticut, and the CEO of the utility and the governor were talking, and the governor, basically CEO of the utility, said, "Hey, we would have doubled the demand in 5 years." So he showed numbers that they're worried about, because they see that the demand curve for the past 20 years has been same, because the efficiencies, the LED lights, we've been working on a lot of efficiency related projects. So even though we use more energy, but we become more efficient. So the level was pretty leveled for past 20 years, but they are showing curves now that are showing that in next 5 years, it's going to double. And then the governor stood up and said, "I want only 3 things from you, dear utility. I want you to provide electricity reliably. I want you to reduce your emissions, and I don't want you to increase the cost of it to my consumers." And we were sitting and saying, whoa, how is that gonna happen? Like, which world are they living in? But I do agree with you that more and more and more is not the answer. We do need to talk about consumer behavior and consumer approaches to this whole thing too. And there needs to be a discussion on that. I'm 100% with you on that. Everywhere you just see governments putting more and more pressure on corporations, but I don't see any pressure on the consumers. And that has to change in my mind too.
Great session. Thank you so much. I'm Tom Richard at Penn State, and I wanted to hear your thoughts about dispatchable electricity. We've heard about base load electricity, but dispatchable electricity is essential for all the intermittent renewable sources. And batteries are really expensive, especially if you need to hold energy for more than a few hours. And the grid has got capacity to store natural gas for about a month. So how do we take advantage of that?
Yeah, I guess I can maybe offer the first initial reaction. I think specifically related to, I guess, biogas assets and the question of dispatchability. If your asset is producing biogas 24/7 at a fairly uniform rate, maximizing the impact from that asset lends itself to a similar power generation profile, right? And there's some technologies that are more suited to ramping and dispatchability than other technologies. So I think biogas assets could definitely be leveraged and utilized for some of that dispatchability. It would require, I think, market mechanisms that would value that sort of firm dispatchability to compensate for perhaps underutilizing the biogas production. So I think it's a case-by-case basis, but I think generally speaking, if you've got an asset that's producing fuel around the clock, maximizing that fuel would make the most sense. And yes, you could work around it with some storage and to meet some dispatchability needs. And I guess it comes back to economics, economics like most things, but that's some of my initial thoughts. Just it's mainly around production profiles and getting the most out of that asset.
And we are actually also looking into that exact issue, the question of dispatchability. With respect to our kind of data center model, there are certain types of data processing that don't require 24/7 uptime. So there's certain batch processing and things that can be stopped and started. And so from that perspective, you can actually use data center assets as sort of when, let's say, during the day in off-peak hours, you can be diverting the power to your on-site data processing resources. And then during peak hours or when electricity is needed most on the grid, you can sort of ramp down your data and ramp up your export. And you can actually use that type of data processing. You can actually use essentially like a battery. It's you're always consuming, because biogas is being produced 24/7. You need to consume it and utilize it. So you can use that data asset as a ramping mechanism to help stabilize that.
Yeah, I feel like the whole electricity industry, which I include solar, wind, and us into, I think we need to optimize. We are more base load. That's just I feel like we're stronger to be the base load. And then if solar and battery, they're trying so hard to be the base load, but it's so hard for them to be the base load. So they are maybe more suitable for the dispatchability. So is there a way for us to start talking to everybody and start to say, hey, you're strong at this, we're strong at this, and maybe there is a way for us to create a cohesive, integrated structure. I don't feel like we should be the biogas industry should so much focus on dispatchability because the strength is the base load, but we should definitely talk to people. So one of what we get extra money in Massachusetts for clean peak. So during during peak hours, if you inject clean energy and you're reducing emissions, we get paid for it. So we were like, oh, great. Why don't we store the electricity for the non-peak hours and only inject it during the peak hours? But the problem is, if we have a 0.5 megawatt interconnection, to be able to do that, now you need a 2 megawatt interconnection. And so that adjustment grid cannot adjust that easily on those things. So there are issues with that we are finding that it's not easy to be flexible on. However, if we are down for a little bit and we store it, yeah, sure, those kinds of things we can do, but that's like 5-10% kind of level, not 30, 40, 50, twofold, threefold during peak hours. So my sense is there needs to be optimization across the industry, not just within our industry. That may actually be a better fit in the long run. But I'm sure in the meantime, geniuses like Adam will come up with ways to do it in different ways. So does that answer your question?
I'm going to have a follow-up then, okay?
No, please follow up now.
Yeah.
By the way,
So-
he is a genius professor from Penn State, and this is what he does when he doesn't do anything. He's taking a little. He's going to be emeritus professor soon.
I am.
Oh, you are? Okay.
Right.
So thank you for coming.
Which means they stopped paying me. Yeah. So you all are producing electricity on site, and if you're going to move that electricity off site, you've already got one interconnect to pay for, and it's expensive, right? But if you also had a gas interconnect, or if you were building facilities with a gas interconnect, then you can use the grid to store your renewable methane molecules. And right now, peaking power is most cheaply supplied by natural gas turbines, which are already paid for. They're already attached to the grid. The utilities already are turning them on and off when they need to. It takes about a minute. And we're, as an industry, not taking advantage of that yet. And that peak power, as you know, is the most valuable power in the grid. It is way more valuable than baseload power. And so I just think there needs to be the right policy incentives and the technology incentives to take advantage of that opportunity.
Thank you. We certainly need to talk about it.
Yeah, I'm just reacting to that because I think that's a very creative way of thinking about it. And I guess, yeah, you get that gas interconnection, then you've got to buy a generating unit at a high capacity to then.
He's talking about natural gas peaking plants.
Yep.
So I think the issue for us is we're not even able to pencil out electricity projects with the electricity prices today. So it feels a little daunting to now say, oh, we're going to add an upgrading system on top of the generating system, and we're going to have an interconnect. So, but if there are enough incentives and it makes sense, then yes, 100%. It's just in today's world, that the connections are not as strong, and there isn't enough organized conversation happening with the utilities to say, where is your biggest gap and how can we bridge it? I mean, so one of the big things we want to start, and I think ABC is, Heather Dietzig is, I don't know if she's here or not, but she's definitely initiating, is our industry talking to the utilities and the utility regulatory agencies, because we need to talk and we need to figure out how are we going to get to that level. If natural gas peaking plants disappear because New York doesn't support natural gas or certain states don't support natural gas, they disappear, then how are we gonna manage the requirements during peak hours? So it's definitely a big question.
Professor, but I have a lot of respect for him. His answer is very simple. What he said, you have a biogas plant, take the biogas, process it to RNG, inject to the pipeline. Pipeline is going to act as a reservoir. The natural gas turbine exists. Within a minute, you can generate power, peak power, feed the power to the grid. That is as simple as that. This is what you said, correct? Yeah.
I can address that. I mean, like the whole part of the whole purpose that Vespine was founded was because we're targeting sites that are impossible to develop for RNG. So there's so many additional costs that go into developing RNG projects to get the gas to the pipeline quality, to upgrade it so you're filtering, you need to put it through a membrane and filter out the CO2, and you have to clean it up and you have to inject it, and getting the building pipeline, like injection pipeline to the site. Like these are all reasons why, like fundamental reasons why our company was founded, is because there's a vast amount of sites that just aren't, and we know RNG developers really well. We work with them, and they are essentially sort of passing sites to us that they can't develop for RNG. And so I think in theory it sounds like a great concept, but in actuality the sort of the capital required to do those things is very difficult. Not to mention the additional power requirements to, an RNG facility has a significant power requirement to upgrade that gas. And so now you're actually importing power to the site that wasn't there previously. So there's a lot of complexities with it.
Yeah, and where I was going to go with my reaction is that there's something to it. There are some challenges, and to your point about sort of market reform, I think one of the key aspects that would likely be required there is then the project is somewhat anchored to merchant power generation market, and then securing financing, and there's other complications that come along with that. But again, another creative way of thinking about it, and they all should be looked at. Yeah.
Yeah, and the regulation that I mentioned earlier that went final, so it's based upon the carbon intensity of the fuel, and peaking plants are regulated under that rule. So I think, I guess personal opinion is EPA didn't set the bar low enough to help us out, but it's a step in the right direction. As we communicate options to our clients to address those types of rules, I'm sure biogas will be part of the discussion.
I'm going to shift gears a little bit on this question. Any development in the renewable world always attracts detractors. And I've seen it in biomass, I've seen it in solar and wind. What sorts of efforts are we doing in RNG, or have you found are successful when offering up an RNG project to overcome the bias against renewable energy?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right in that there are some naysayers out there that don't consider, they don't think landfills should exist, and they don't, they maybe on a dairy side, they think that, oh well, putting a digester in can propagate unsanitary and environmental harmful herdsman practices and things like this. And so there definitely are groups out there that are sort of lobbying strongly against the interests of the biogas community. I think the best thing that we can do is just get strong grassroots support, and we've generated high level of support for our projects. Well, part of our mission is to engage with the communities and get sort of strong buy-in from the communities where these projects are sited. You know, a lot of our partners are municipal landfills, and showing up kind of in person to the board meeting and answering questions from the community, and sort of communicating that the project is sort of intended to create a circular economy by building that grassroots support from firstly from the landfill or from kind of community insiders can help to kind of shield from any of those real loud naysayers.
Yeah, I think the voices, the EJ voices, the environmental justice voices are really, really growing strong. I mean, if you were part of the CARB discussions, oh my gosh, I mean, the fact that we are delayed is because of EJ. So I don't know how many of you all understand EJ, because it took me some time to understand. So I'm going to go to real basics. Environmental justice is the quality of air. They do not consider methane as environmental justice because it's not a pollutant. They don't consider carbon dioxide as a pollutant. Those are all greenhouse gases. The pollutants are NOxes, SOxes, particulate matter. Those are the things that when you breathe, it can affect your lungs, and it can affect. So I'm sympathetic to their voices, actually, because for the longest time, dairies are operating, but the people who are operating these dairies are these hidden people that you never see. I go to Varys, I talk to the owner of the dairy, and I talk to the key people, and then I'll see people around who are invisible. And those are the voices, their families who live right by the dairies. We need to listen to their voices because that's the community we're trying to impact. Similar to that is the landfill, right? Wherever, so I don't. We should not minimize them. We should listen to them. But what we need to kind of just do is explain to them that actually our digester projects take out H2S. Yes, we are combusting, and maybe we're producing a bit more particulate matter, but California has shown that we can actually really improve the or reduce the emissions from these engines. So let's focus on reduction of emissions from the engines. And my friend Paul here would say, yeah, sure, here's fuel cell. Talk to me. There are technologies out there that are actually helping reduce the EJ, but they're getting lost in the sea of comments. So I'll let Paul say a few words.
Yeah, Rashi, you beat me to it. I think, to your point, not all projects are necessarily created equal, right? And there's different technologies for different solutions. And there are some that lean more favorable to air permitting and EJ issues with technologies like Bloom's and others that don't emit NOx, SOx, or particulate matter. So yeah, you beat me to the punch. Thank you.
Are there any more questions? Well, yeah, please.
Just one, because we haven't talked about it yet. Maybe you can give us an update on the status, like where we are with eRINs and kind of the marketplace, and just because you guys are so close to that side of the market, I think it'd be awesome for us all to hear.
I can lead that off. Actually, funnily enough, there's a bi-weekly meeting by a community called PEP, or Partnership for Electric Pathways. The meeting was actually at 11 a.m. this morning, so we missed the meeting to be on this panel. But I know that several of us are very vocal members of that committee. I can say that there is, the EPA has not indicated kind of really any movement on the topic. They have mentioned that they aren't going to, they're not taking it off the table. They've mentioned specifically that they refuse to kind of take it off the table. I think that the main discussion is that, given the upcoming election cycle, that it's unlikely any decision, yay or nay, is going to get made until well after the election takes place. So that's sort of what we are, that's what we're anticipating. But I know that we as a company, I know Rashi as well, are participating in a lot of efforts to lobbying efforts. For one example, we've led a letter from written and signed by all of the mayors of the various communities that own the landfills that we're working with. We've sort of we've drafted that letter, gotten those mayoral signatures, and then sent that to the EPA. And those types of engagement we've found to be very effective because it sort of groups together the voices of the communities, and that those are sort of the people that the EPA is really hoping to address. I don't know, Rashi, do you want to say some more?
Yeah, no, you've done a really good job, Adam, in summarizing. But I think there was momentum early on, as you know, last year. Very unhappy that it didn't happen. But I think we as an industry have to take a little bit of responsibility also on that not happening, because we were kind of blindsided by, oh my gosh, we are not going to own eRINs. We'll have to give it to somebody else. And it took us a little time to reconcile with that. That's okay. That actually it's worth having the program more than who owns the eRINs. And I think we have been very actively communicating that to EPA now, after that June of last year, that we want a program. And it's okay what you proposed. We can live with that. And that message, I think, has hopefully gone to the White House, to the EPA, to the USDA. I know we have some supporters, but EPA had a couple of big things that came out: utility emissions, I think, and then the vehicle emissions, the heavy truck emissions. So they wanted to pass those first. So we kind of got pushed to the number 3. So we are hoping we're at the top of the list now. I don't think I'm kind of like with Adam. I don't think there's optimism that it would happen this year. Can it happen? Sure. But what's the probability? Not very high. I am hoping it'll happen next year, personally, because our team is banking on it. We have many projects that we are doing in states where the electricity rates are 4 cents per kilowatt hour. We can't pencil projects with 4 cents per kilowatt hour. We want to go to other states, but we are stuck in states where the rates are a little bit better. And so we have passed that message to USDA, saying small to mid-sized dairies, especially in those states where the electricity rates are low, are not feasible. And if you really want to do this, you really have to create that support. So let's hope. But right now, we are definitely in the hope phase. Yeah, so I know it's time to wrap up. And this was a perfect question to wrap up with. If you all have any other questions, we're going to be here for the next few minutes. Please come forward and talk to us. We want to hear your ideas. So thank you. Thank you so much for coming.